What's up, Ego Hackers? This is CS Joseph, and this is Season 18, Episode 15 for Cognitive Mechanics. We're talking about the second reflection for the reflector functions. And this is probably the deepest and my most favorite content to date. And very much hope that you folks can actually hear me right now, which I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, but it's what I'm going for, so please let me know in the chat if that's true or not. I also just now had the opportunity to actually make sure that I didn't lose my show notes this time, and I didn't, which was great. So very happy that I didn't do that. So yeah, if you folks could let me know if you guys can hear me. Oh, Jay says yes. Okay. Well, Jay's here, which is awesome. Been a hell of a week for me here on the West Coast, but yeah, it's been real interesting. So, anywho, I am kind of going a different direction with a lot of lectures. I'm actually like creating general outlines for a lot of the lectures ahead of time. It helps me stay on point and ramble a lot less, but I mean, a good tangent here and there is pretty good, so it is what it is. But yeah, glad you folks are happy with the with what it is so far. But anywho, so yeah, the second reflection, we're discussing extroverted sensing hero versus extroverted intuition demon. In this one, as well as extroverted sensing parent versus extroverted intuition trickster, which is also known as the battleground of responsibles or battleground of responsibility, right? The responsible people, who the responsible people should be, right? Battleground of titans is the hero versus the demon. Battleground of responsibility is the parent versus the trickster. Battleground of innocence is the child versus the critic, also known as the grandparents in this particular model, and the battleground of inhibition, which is also your inferior function versus the nemesis, etc. I'm going to actually share my screen. Let's see here. Is this going to work? I hope this works. Let's see. All right, cool. So I've got my little general outline here in terms of usually how these shows are going to go. But let's actually add in the attitudes here, and then we're going to say hero versus the demon, basically, etc. Hit Control C, gonna hit Control V, gonna hit Control V, gonna hit Control V. Excuse me. Oops. Although these are not all like, you know, the demon and the hero, etc. Whoops, let's not do that, please. Inhibition is the inferior. Let's actually spell correctly. I don't know if you guys can read this. I hope you can. But if I zoom in too much, it might make it a little bit more difficult to actually read. So let me know if you guys can actually see this. That would be great. Child versus the critic, and we are going to have Mr. Chris Taylor join us, not this episode, not the next one, but the one after. So I believe that's September for season 18. He's going to be giving a more generalized as well as a more in-depth look at the specific battlegrounds, but how they interact with each other, not necessarily like what they're doing on their own, but it's more of something that is because sometimes these battlegrounds exist within a person, but they also exist without, like they exist outside of a person. So from person to person, these battlegrounds often have to fight from that point of view. All right, so parent to the trickster. There we go. Awesome. So yeah. But yeah, that should give a general idea of what we're looking for here. And again, hopefully you guys can read that. I imagine you can, because I can kind of read it actually on my camera here, looking at what the stream looks like. So I'm just going to assume that that's the case. So awesome. So yeah, but anywho, so let's kick off the episode, because like, you know, we need really long introductions around here, because that's what we do best, you know, long introductions, right? So In season 18, we've discussed cognitive synchronicity. We've discussed cognitive asynchronicity. We actually have an entire season devoted to cognitive asynchronicity right now. And cognitive synchronicity and cognitive asynchronicity is basically how people's relationships with other people, how they relate to one another. And what this does is this actually can create areas of development. If you develop one function on one end of one axis, the other function will also naturally develop over time, which is awesome. It's a great relationship. So if your inferior function improves, your hero function definitely is going to be improving as well, and conversely the other way around. However, the level of growth and development is not as high for the inferior function. If you're focusing on developing your hero, it's not as high. But if you focus on the inferior function because it is the lesser of the two, definitely the hero function will rapidly grow. Conversely, the parent and the child as well. Although the parent-child has a different relationship because the parent function, while it is the greater of the two, is the one that actually receives a lot of development over time. The thing is, though, is that you still have to focus on developing your parent first to really, really grow the child. And this is basically more of an optimistic versus pessimistic functions outlook when it comes to what you have in your ego. You want to develop the pessimistic functions in order to get the optimistic functions to actually follow suit. And that's another way of developing a cognitive axis. So I'm actually going to add that to my little outline here just so we have that. I may actually release these outlines with the lectures as well. We're considering it. So yeah. Okay. Now, the reason why you want to, develop your pessimistic functions first to grow the optimistic functions, it's very key. The reason why is because you're able to. It's like a straight shot to maturity. It's the if you want to like fast track your own personal growth as a person, but again, optimistic functions, they can kind of take things for granted. They have it a little bit easier than the pessimistic functions, whereas the pessimistic functions are a bit more skeptical as a result. So when it comes to your own cognitive development, utilizing access is very helpful. But then we've also talked about within season 18 the concept of cognitive orbit, where the shadow of your ego, also known as the unconscious, if you can make the unconscious conscious, right? You're going to improve your life and improve everything for you. You're also going to gain wisdom, which is also important. And the unconscious is basically the back door into the ego. And if you develop the unconscious with the ego, use those back doors. Like, for example, like what we've been talking about in the How to Parent series at csjoseph.life/members. In the How to Parent series, we've been talking about how, like, for example, if you really want to develop a parent function, well, it's hard to do that with an adolescent because their ego is closed off. It's completely closed off because their superego is starting to develop at that point. Their ego is fully grown, and their parent function, even though it's a teenager function basically, and it's kind of weak, it's starting to defend the ego basically. So you can't directly develop the parent function, so you have to go into the critic function via cognitive orbit, develop the critic function of your adolescent basically in order to get them to grow your parent function. And if your parent function is underdeveloped, if you're cognitive looping all the time, meaning looping being that your hero and your child loops together, objective personality system, people call it cognitive looping. It is a thing. That is one area of the science we absolutely agree on. Cognitive looping is a thing, and they'll just spin around, and it's because they're just ignoring the teenager and the parent. The hero basically is able to overpower the parent because the hero is like, wow, you're just a teenager, who cares? But when the parent is really a parent, the hero will actually start to listen, and then the parent will be able to get between the hero and the child's hijinks, basically, which leads to a higher level of responsibility and maturity. But in order to get to that area of development, you have to utilize cognitive orbit to do that, from adolescence on. You don't necessarily have to do that in childhood. However, the parent function is just not there during childhood. It's just not, it's there, but it's not really doing anything. It's just hasn't grown up yet. So keep that in mind. It's a really, really big deal. And, a parent function's development overall is usually a good barometer or a good thermometer or something from which a person can measure somebody else's, I don't know, I don't want to say mental health because that's super subjective and I would never really want to claim that. But understanding a person's cognitive development overall, you can actually kind of look at the parent function and get an idea of what they are like. 60 to 80% is covered just by the parent function's level of development. If you know people who have really developed parent functions, or you have some examples in your life of people who really develop parent functions, you can compare those to people who don't have as well developed parent functions, and you can kind of see where those people are in their journey. And this could actually assist you in making decisions in terms of who you're going to be doing business with, or who you're going to marry, or who you're going to have children with, etc. Those kinds of big life decisions that involve third parties or other people of some, magnitude within your life and your decision making, look to the parent function. Please look to the parent function to be able to come to that conclusion, right? 1 second here. I actually I have to write something down before I forget because I have, let's see here. I have a Confessions of an ENTP episode coming up, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And it's actually discussing reflector functions in a big way, but in a different light. It's actually going super metaphysical, especially from spirituality point of view, and where reflector functions can actually point the human race in a certain direction, right? So more on that later. But anyway, cognitive orbit is another area of development. Now, cognitive reflection, and with reflector functions, this comes from Dr. John Beebe, and which is really important because Dr. John Beebe wrote Energies and Patterns of Psychological Type. If you haven't read the book yet, please read that book. Like, seriously, please read that book. It's really short. It's really great. But he talks about the concept of mirror functions within the book. Well, we've named it cognitive reflection. The reason why is because we already talk about, the mirror, with what Templar types do, etc. But anyway, make sure you guys read that book if you haven't. It is absolutely fantastic. I highly support Dr. John Beebe and his work, and I just, I'm not getting paid to say this, but please check out his book if you haven't already. But when it comes to cognitive reflection, it has a different point. So I would like to make one statement though, real quick, and this comes from, and I forget your name. I'm so sorry that I've forgotten your name. I don't mean to forget your name, but it sort of happened, and I should have written it down. My bad. I can't necessarily take credit for this because somebody pointed this out in the YouTube comments recently, and I thought it was awesome. I thought it was really awesome. So let me actually read it to you while I'm typing it out at the same time. But basically, the ego. So your ego, the primary side of your mind, the ego is in axis with your subconscious, right? And then it is also, the ego is in orbit with your unconscious, or also known as the shadow, right? And your ego is a reflection of your superego. And apparently I'm getting called on the phone. It's my cousin Mike. Sorry, buddy, you're gonna have to mute you. I normally stop everything I'm doing to take his call, but I can't do that during a live stream. So anyway, so the ego is in axis with your subconscious, the ego is in orbit with your unconscious, and your ego is the reflection of your superego, right? So this helps you understand kind of where your cognition is in relationship with the other four sides of your mind. If your ego is actually the point of origin with which most people operate, which it really is, unless of course something bad happens and all of a sudden your superego flips with your ego. They completely flip roles because you had a head injury or something, which can happen. I have had 2 coaching clients in history of my practice where that has happened. Someone suffered severe abuse and they just literally flipped, and it was kind of interesting and kind of scary. And I even had the opportunity to speak to their spouse as well in one of those situations, in one of those sessions, and it was absolutely fascinating to kind of see how their spouse reacted to this entire mental change as to what's going on. And I'm sure there was plenty of challenge to be had within the context of that marriage because of this huge cognitive change, right? But either way, it's definitely something that is mega fascinating to me. And I think, over time as people grow and whatnot, like I said, it doesn't matter what the compatibility or even the camaraderie of a relationship is, unless, of course, you get to the point where, it's like, hey, I mean, are you being immature about it? Are you being mature about it? Because the more mature you are, technically you should be able to handle those relationships. And that's, it is what it is. So anyway, but that takes us back, into cognitive reflection. And cognitive reflection, just because I didn't really have it as concise in the previous episode, reflector functions, they express behavior. They exhibit behavior. They're not really used to develop behavior. They're all about behavioral expression or behavioral exhibiting. That's all it is. And like I said, in general, you can use the parent function as the barometer or the measure of, how developed a person is, usually. But the absolute best measure, the absolute best barometer of measuring someone's cognitive development is really how they handle their cognitive reflections, how they handle their cognitive functions, and the various different ways of going about it, right? And with all the different, with the 4 battlegrounds, and okay, are they using it in a more negative way? Are they using it more in a positive way? It will actually tell you overall how well developed or how mature or how far someone is on their path to enlightenment and integration, probably more than anywhere else. Sure, we talk about cognitive transitions. Sure, we talk about being able to develop your gateway functions. We talk all about that, and those are very, very important. But at the end of the day, those don't always exhibit behavior because cognitive transition is very finite. It happens sometimes. It doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen like every single second. Although some people in certain situations, in high stress situations, they can cognitive transition rapidly between the 4 sides of the mind with healthy gateways to be able to solve that issue. But predominantly, most people just sit in their ego. Predominantly, they want to, be laying on the couch in their ego, just hanging out. It doesn't matter. They just like hanging out in their ego. That's typically what happens. Me, however, with the amount of stress that I put on myself, I kind of hang out. I don't really often hang out in my ego, honestly. So I end up having to go into my ego to it's hard to even calm down sometimes. It's kind of weird. If you want to calm me down, you just give me caffeine. Yeah, it's because I go ISFJ behind the scenes mode and I'm just like, But if you want to make me not calm down and just help me focus a bit more, you give me some alcohol because it puts me more towards my INTJ focused side of my mind, right? Because NI, nemesis, or NI itself is the focus function. It's where focus comes from. Concentration, which is not the same as focus, concentration is self-discipline and that's introverted sensing, okay? So it's a completely different thing. That being said, reflector functions predominantly express behavior, and it will help you. They're indicators of a person's actual development. It indicates where they are in their own development throughout their journey. But the reflector functions, when they're being used, or the relationships that they have with one another, they're not for developing behavior. That's what cognitive orbit is for. That's what cognitive axis is for. You develop in that way. Gateway functions, etc. Cognitive transitioning, those are the tools that a person uses for development. But cognitive reflection is just what happens based on a certain person, on a person's level of development, where they are in their life, basically. The reflector functions is basically how they express their behavior, ultimately. Because sometimes, when they're making decisions, they'll substitute out certain functions for other functions, when making those decisions. And that could be a problem, right? So understand that it's a thing. It's a risk that comes in there. A lot of people, I assume, would start to believe that the 4 battlegrounds are areas from which cognitive development can come from, but it's not true. It's not true. the battlegrounds are not for developing. They're not. The battlegrounds are named the battlegrounds for a reason. The battlegrounds are not about tutelage. It's not about growth. It's not about learning. It's to fight. It's to express. It's to exhibit behavior. That's why they're called battlegrounds. You see what I'm saying? So anyway, I just wanted to get this part of the lecture in, because it's not something we went into depth within episode 1 per se, and I kind of need to give a little bit more built within the foundation behind what reflector functions are, so that we can actually move forward with this understanding, right? So just remember, in terms of areas of development and things that can be developed, look to axis and orbit for that, transitions, gateway functions, etc., like stuff that we talk about in season 19 and season 22, etc. But in terms of just behavioral, raw behavioral expression, reflector functions. That's where it's all about. And we're going to be talking about raw behavioral expression right now with extroverted sensing versus extroverted intuition, which is great because that's my wife, and that's also like literally everyone in terms. And I say that's my wife because I'm talking about that's her battleground of Titans, right? Whereas for me, it's a little bit different. Oh, wait, it's not, because it's my battleground too. Because my hero, it's the reverse. It's the reverse of the hero and the demon, basically. So let's discuss that. Okay. Let's get to. Need to actually write a reminder here. Go both directions if possible. So there's a lot to discuss. So extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing is a person's awareness of performance, having shared experiences with other people. They don't want to be abandoned. They want people to stick around for them. They want to be able to have that freedom of choice, and even though it creates consequences for other people around them, even creates responsibilities for other people around them, that those people are strong enough and capable enough to handle those responsibilities, to handle those negative consequences that could be caused by extroverted sensing as a result of the SE user using their introverted intuition decision making. That's a thing. That's a risk, right? So with that being said, it's important to be aware of that. But you look at any hero, it's all about desirability. It's about what other people want consistently, and introverted sensing exists there as an inferior function. And that inferior function, it's in terms, or it could be a child, it could be anywhere. It's always linked to extrovert intuition within that same side of the mind. But the difference is that the more effort that I put in, the more desirable I am, right? Right? Well, not always, right? Or the more risks I take, the less consequences made for other people, right? Or the better the experience, right? The more risks I take, the better the experience, right? The better the consequence, the better the effect, right? The bigger the cause, the bigger the effect, right? Cause and effect awareness, which is what extroverted sensing is, right? No. So look, there's a huge difference between SE and NE. The biggest difference is the fact that extroverted sensing itself, okay, is all about reactions, cause and effect. It's about awareness of the effects, but it's the short-term effects. It's the immediate effects, right? And that's all they care about, because to them, the immediate effects is what is real. However, extrovert intuition is the opposite. The extrovert intuition goes further. Extrovert intuition is the consequences. It is the long-term effects, the long-term consequences, right? So you have basic immediate effects versus long-term effects. Consequences versus reactions, right? Consequences and reactions. That is what this second reflection actually is, right? And this reflection exists in all of the 16 types, and we're going to be discussing their behavior in all of the 16 types literally right now, and their attitudes. And hopefully we'll have enough time to actually discuss negative examples of those reflections and positive examples of those reflections as well. So, okay. Let's see here. Okay. Okay. Yeah, just making sure I'm doing this right. Awesome. All right, so anyway, in comes the Battleground of Titans. And the reason why it's called the Battleground of Titans is because, guess what? The hero is insanely powerful, and the demon is just as powerful, if not actually more powerful. But for some reason, the demon, because, it's the good force, it's the good energy, and the demon is the evil energy, but even though that's entirely subjective, good versus evil from that mode. The hero has the ability to lock the demon away and lock the demon in the abyss, and the abyss is basically the superego, etc., right? Well, that can be a problem. Well, the Battleground of Titans, depending on a person's level of development, whether or not you have, instead of the warrior, instead of the hero being, is the hero grown up? Is it grown into the warrior? Is it still a hero? Or is the demon still a demon, or is it an angel? Is it preaching hate? Is it preaching love? Is the warrior preaching pride, or is it preaching humility? Pride is the way of the hero. Humility is the way of the warrior. These are the different aspects, the different poles that, in terms of immaturity versus maturity, in terms of, both of the Titans that are represented within this battleground, the Battleground of the Titans, etc. This is where it comes from. And thank you so much, Chris Taylor, for these awesome names and being able to play with these concepts. I very much enjoy our discussions about this and having the opportunity to present this in this really cool way. Thank you, good sir, for your help there. That being said, there's a lot of negative behaviors and positive behaviors relating to this battleground. So let's discuss extroverted sensing hero. Okay, let's discuss SE hero. And there's two SE heroes. That is the ESTP and the ESTP and the ESFP. Okay, the two SE heroes. Well, the problem is that they're NI inferior. It's an inferior function. They oftentimes do not know what they want. Sometimes they don't want to make a choice because certain doors will close, and that could be a serious problem for introvert intuition inferior over time. And that's something that ultimately needs to be avoided, because as the introvert intuition inferior aspires, it's actually willing to take more risks. And because, from their point of view, greater risk, more reward, right? Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. But what happens is that whenever their inferior function's choice gets taken away, the extrovert intuition demon comes out and takes away everyone's choice until the little kid, because the little kid has a really good relationship with the demon for some reason. The demon is basically the guardian angel of the inferior function. A lot of people don't realize that. It is the guardian angel of the inferior function oftentimes. Especially since the little kid, it's easy to, neglect a baby because the baby just needs to be fed and slept all day long, and the hero and the parent can just kind of ignore the little baby and then deal with the child that's wrecking the house and deal with that. So it ends up often being the uncle or the aunt who has to take care of the inferior, has to take care of the infant and feed the baby and clothe the baby and, those kinds of things. So oftentimes the demon ends up being the guardian angel to the infant. It's like a godfather, basically. It's the godfather, essentially, within this model. And that can be good, but it can be bad too. And we talk a little bit about this in terms of like how to master your demon, which is, for members. And we got 2 episodes coming out this month for that. They're not out yet, but it is coming very soon. But with that being said, any demons versus SE hero, it's like it's so funny because the hero function itself, when it's not even a warrior yet, it really starts to take for granted its ability to outperform. And it does. So let's discuss performance. I've actually had this discussion with my wife multiple times because she's an extroverted sensing hero, right? And it's weird because I've noticed SE heroes in my life. For example, my ex-wife, she had this problem. Where sometimes, she would be way too flamboyant with how she dressed, or she wouldn't even bother. She wouldn't bother at all, and she'd be very boring, basically, with her aesthetics and whatnot, and she just didn't really put in very much effort into it. And from her point of view, it's like, no, it's fine. I could perform anytime. I can outperform anybody. I can outperform anyone, anytime, anywhere, and etc. And she always had that point of view. And it's technically true. SE Hero can outperform everyone. And, my ex-wife, she also took that to her job. And I've noticed something. What's similar about SE Heroes? Well, they all have SI Nemesis, and this SI Nemesis means that their unconscious side of their mind is this, it's an SJ. It's an SJ type. And what are SJs really good at doing? Resting on their laurels, right? They love resting on their laurels, right? So what ends up happening is that the SE Hero ends up taking their ability to perform and to outperform everybody else for granted. This is why you end up having SE inferiors, extroverted sensing inferiors, like INFJs and INTJs, especially women, INTJ women, consistently winning, Miss America pageants, for example, over and over and over and over, consistently. And the majority of the models that you see for Fashion Nova, the models you see for Victoria's Secret, etc., or these other fashion conglomerate companies, etc., the majority of them, most of them, are extroverted sensing inferior women with their extroverted sensing aspirational. And they are, when it comes to aesthetics, they are outperforming all of the SE Hero women. And it's because the SE Hero women are taking that for granted, okay? Well, this really pisses off the demon function. And the demon function, it's like, hey, I want to be able to, I need you to be desirable. But you're not going to be desirable because you're not putting in the effort. You're not putting in the effort because you're taking your ability to perform for granted, right? And this happens to every extroverted sensing hero. And I think it's even worse for an ESFP because they're very progression. They're very movement. They're willing to shortcut their way through whatever performance it is. Whereas an ESTP, it's a little bit different. It's kind of like an on and off switch. It's just like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do that, or no, I'm not going to do that at all, because it's very outcome focused. If you want like straight, it is this or it is not this, TI influence on-off switch behavior, go to the ESTP. Because if they're not going to get the outcome that they're looking for, they're not even going to bother in the first place. And then if you mix that in with them taking for granted what it is, if they're taking for granted their ability to perform, well, then they're not going to perform. And this what ends up happening to SE Heroes is that this is why they become really undesirable to other people, and it really pisses off their demon function. This is why the demon function is constantly in its demonic mode, because it's like, wow, I am not wanted. Wow, I am not desirable, etc. And this continues to be problem after problem after problem after problem because of how undesirable this extrovert intuition demon actually is. Eventually, it'll break out of the abyss, or it'll be let out of the abyss. It'll be either let out of the abyss by the infant. The infant will let out the demon, or maybe even the hero or the parent will. In some cases, maybe even the child. This is the demonic child, the demonic parent. That can be a thing, right? They'll let the demon out because they'll need its assistance, etc., because they know it's powerful, right? Well, that doesn't always work out. So, gosh. So, that could be a serious issue with that. Gosh, what I was going to say about Battleground Titans. And when you're looking at other people, like, let's look at the reverse, the extrovert intuition hero to the extroverted sensing demon. Like, for me, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's all about desirability, man. It's all about, me putting in a lot of effort, man, so that I could be desirable to other people. The more effort I put in, the more desirable, right? Well, not necessarily. My father would constantly tell me as a small child, like, hey, you need to learn how to do things right the first time, which is what extroverted sensing demon is all about. It wants me to be able to perform. Extroverted sensing demon is like trying to get me to perform on a regular basis, but it just won't. It won't perform. Or I just won't perform in certain cases because I get lazy, because I get stuck in my SI inferior comfort zone, basically. So then I end up putting in a lot of effort and then feeling like I'm entitled to other people wanting me because on virtue I put in effort. But the thing is that effort is literally just being on a rocking horse. A lot of movement, but going nowhere. You see what I'm saying? That's why my dad's always trying to tell me do it right the first time, and that's exactly what extroverted sensing demon is trying to tell ENPs. Do it right the first time. It's to the point where I actually have to be willing to practice. Even though I can remember how to do things all the time, I have to be willing to practice and further improve my craft, because it is through practice that I'm going to get absolute mastery. And instead of relying on the amount of effort that I'm doing for my inferior function, I'm going to be relying on my demon's ability to practice, essentially, its ability to, perform, to also empower my hero, to empower my ability to be desirable to other people, for example, to empower my warrior at that point, I would hope. See what I'm saying, folks? Does this make any sense? Like, I mean, is the audience like dead tonight? I don't know. No one's talking in the chat. In terms of, that is not relevant. That question, knowledge of greatness, that question is not relevant to this lecture, and we're gonna have Q&A at the end. So maybe we could fit that in somehow. I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, so that's kind of what the Battlegrounds of Titans look like from like a negative standpoint in terms of expert sensing and expert intuition, right? Where the demon is constantly at odds with the hero because the demon's essentially calling out the hero. And sometimes, in most cases, the demon has to lie to the hero because it's afraid that the hero is going to lock it up back in the abyss, right? Which is what we've been talking about in the Mastering Your Demon lecture series. Fair enough. But then, let's look at the parent, right? Let's look at the parent versus trickster, right? It's like, and by the way, cognitive reflections also kind of exposes a lot of hypocrisy because, like, for example, SE Hero is able to perform and potentially outperform everybody else, but do they actually? No. It's actually, interestingly enough, it's expert sensing inferiors that do. Like, on paper, the SE Hero should be able to do it, but they rest on their laurels. Expert intuition rests on its laurels because it becomes entitled after putting in a lot of effort. You see what I'm saying? It becomes entitled, okay? Well, these are problems. And this is why the demon function is having such a hard time. It's why it's consistently at odds with the ego, because it has no respect for the ego, because it sees the top dog of your mind, the top dog of lacking in humility. And it's full of pride. And that pride is leading to this unhealthy resting of laurels behavior. Every hero function does this, okay? To have a positive experience with the Battleground of Titans, it's a little bit different, okay? And we kind of already talked about this a little bit before because, like I said, I have to be willing to do things right the first time. That's the expert intuition hero kind of way. Or the SE hero kind of way of doing it is they have to be willing to put in more effort. They have to be willing to make themselves desirable. And the thing is that they can't just put in any kind of effort. They can't just go to SI Nemesis and be like, oh yeah, let's just put in whatever effort we could possibly put in and then we're good, right? That's not going to satisfy the demon because the demon's like, okay, yeah, well, are you actually desirable? Like, even my wife told me, like, when she was in high school, she'd go around to every single table in the lunchroom every single time and be like, hey, what's up? And just go from experience to experience to experience to experience and have new shared experiences constantly. But do you think that actually allowed her to have deep, meaningful relationships with any of those people? No. It was all surface. It was all shallow. Do you think she was often invited to things? Do you think someone actually called her up and actually offered her to go somewhere? It's kind of, a lot of people don't understand that about expert intuition demon. People just don't want them. NE demons, they don't want them. So oftentimes, NE demons, through SE heroes, they end up having to create the experience. They end up having to be the host. They have to be the one throwing the party. And that's why ESTPs and ESFPs consistently are the party goers, or they have the MBTI blogosphere, that those two types are the types that party the most, LOL, and we're just going to, put that colloquial, generally accepted label on them because they're the party animal types. The reason why they are is because they have to. Because especially in their youth, no one wants them around. Seriously, no one wants them around at all. Because, they get scared of having deep, meaningful relationships with other people because it's like, my SI Nemesis is so worried about you obligating me if I stick around too much. Wow. That's effective. That's so horrible. Or look at this. I'm going to be entitled to people wanting me around and giving me a choice because I've given everyone else a choice. And because I've put in so much effort for other people to get a choice, that means they're going to give me a choice too. No, any hero. That's a fucking covert contract. That is not accurate. You cannot have that point of view. Folks, I lived my life, for the majority of my life, 70% of my life, with that in mind. Oh, if I just serve and give everyone else choices all the time, they're going to give me a choice because I'm so worried I'm not going to get a choice. So I'm going to give them choices and I'm going to show loyalty and put in a lot of effort, even though I should have been enforcing my boundaries. It's funny, actually, my wife's been criticizing me the last 2 days, actually, about how I haven't been enforcing boundaries with a particular friend of mine, and this has led to me being taken advantage of. And then, and this could have gone on a little bit longer, but I luckily, I was the one who brought it up in the conversation because I just started feeling like my INTJ shadow was getting upset because my demon was telling me, hey man, you're getting taken advantage of, and if you want me to still respect you, then maybe you need to actually establish boundaries, set expectations, and enforce those boundaries so that you stop feeling like, oh, just because you're giving other people choices and giving them better futures and, putting in a lot of effort and loyalty towards them doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to get a really good outcome from them. Doesn't mean you're going to get what you want. They're just going to walk all over you, man. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're right. That's what happens. These reflector functions. This is how that behavior is expressed. And I was expressing that behavior recently because I let somebody close to me start taking advantage of me. But then I called them up. I set my boundaries with them, and they paid me good money yesterday, which I was very thankful for. And then we negotiated a contract earlier today, and we are moving forward. Awesome. So that way I'm no longer being taken advantage of. The thing is that my wife's really cool about this, but she criticized me multiple times, even in terms of this audience, a long time ago for doing the same thing, about how people will text me randomly and I answer their question, and they're just taking advantage of me, they're just pumping me for information, etc., without actually giving anything in return. You can't do that, So I have to establish boundaries with the audience, I have to charge, pricing, etc., and I have to stick to it so that I don't allow myself to become loyal to the wrong people. And that's what SE Demon is trying to tell me. Do it right the first time. Put up boundaries. It's an SE bubble. They have SE bubbles. Have you ever noticed how SE Hero has an SE bubble? Well, guess what? It's like you can't just take a spoon of food and shove it in an SE Hero's face. They will freak out because you're taking their choice away. And they have this invisible bubble in the way. And they will defend that bubble no matter what to prevent that spoonful of food going in their mouth. They have to stop and look at the food first and analyze it and then decide whether or not they will let you put it in their mouth, or they will be the one to put it in their mouth for you, not you, right? It's no different with SE Demon. It needs that. It needs the ability to have an SE bubble, right? Because if it doesn't have an SE bubble, it's going to feel like it's getting walked all over. ESFP Demon does not like getting walked all over, and when it does, it will literally burn everything to the ground. That's what it does. SE red button explosion. You know what I'm saying? So a positive, healthy use of the battleground of Titans as far as any hero is concerned is proper enforcement of boundaries. It is all about when to say no, right? Right? Whereas, with the SE hero, it's about when to say yes, right? It's different. Similar, but different. When to say no versus when to say yes, okay? Because any heroes say yes a lot. They should learn how to say no. Whereas SE heroes say no a lot. They should learn how to say yes. Okay? And it's because, people don't want them around. As much as people get creeped out by any heroes. Really creeped out by them. That's why. They don't feel safe around any heroes. They may feel safe around an SE hero, but the SE hero is still undesirable. Folks, the battleground is supposed to teach us how to be able to do both. To teach us how to become desirable and also to make other people feel safe. And these are just some examples, the SENE approach, okay? That's what it's for, all right? And so those are the negative and positive behaviors of, SE and NE hero versus SE and NE demon. Now let's talk about, the parent functions, parent versus trickster. You have SE parents and you have NE trickster. You have NE parents and you have NE trickster. Very, very, very similar, but not the same. Where they're trying to be super responsible with the moment, responsible with reality around them, or responsible with the future, responsible with metaphysics, responsible with their desirability, etc. And then they have their tricksters where they think they got it figured out, but then they actually don't. And, they're not going to have mastery, with their tricksters starting out. And their parents aren't going to be parents starting out. They're going to be teenager functions. So you have a foolish sophomoric teenager, wise fool, right? Well, they ain't wise. They're pretty foolish. They don't have mastery over anything. They're super irresponsible, right? But they imagine themselves to be. They imagine themselves to be responsible. And this is why it's called the battleground of responsibility. Because, Chris Taylor even told me recently about how, people early on in their development, what they're going to end up doing is that they're going to lead with their trickster function and not with their parent function. And that's what causes cognitive looping. This is the cause right here, folks. This is the actual cause of cognitive looping. If I'm cognitive looping, it's because I'm leading with my FI trickster, not my TI parent, right? And then my NE hero, my FE child, used to do whatever they want because FE child's like, oh, I need to feel good about myself. And it's the good thing to give balloons and candy to those other people and let them, take advantage of me, right? More on that in the battleground of innocence. We'll get there in a second. But in the in the battleground of responsibility, it's a whole different ball game. Because these are parent functions, folks. These are trickster functions. They can get completely fooled, as a result. And you don't want to be fooled. Because, for example, this is what happens when you have ISTPs and also ISFPs. ISPs telling everyone about how great they are in terms of their mechanical mastery or their awareness of the exact cause and effect and all the effects and the exact reactions that's going to happen every single time. But they can't foresee long-term consequences to save their life. Conversely, you have INTPs and INFPs doing something similar. They're claiming now they can predict literally anything, which is true. But they can never see the immediate reactions of something that they do right in front of them. And then they end up pointing their finger at everyone else about how irresponsible people are with their decision making. But when they make a decision, they either make no decision or they make a decision thinking that they're not going to have, a bad immediate blowback to it, and then it does. It's just like, oh, I'm just going to go step over here, except they step on a rake and it smacks them in the face as it comes up, right? That's where that comes from. That's where it comes from. And the trickster is there because it's like, hey, I really need that parent function to be responsible. I need it to be a parent, because otherwise, I'm in charge. Do you really want the guy, you really want the person operating heavy machinery that has no experience operating the heavy machinery? Think about it like a giant safety hazard, right? It's kind of interesting how oftentimes you see like inexperienced ISFPs and inexperienced ISTPs deciding that it's a good idea to weld without wearing a mask or a helmet. Wow, right? Or these are the people who don't, wear helmets while they're riding their motorcycle or the bicycles, right? Constantly, because they're just completely unaware of what could happen, because what could happen is not real, because they live a life of tactics, right? They live a life of tactics. But here's the thing, the trickster function is not going to reach mastery until they actually understand that strategy is a thing. Any trickster is not going to do anything until they have the self-awareness, the ISTP has the self-awareness that actually being proactive is important. Because, ISTPs, they're really great at preparation. ISFPs are also great at preparation because they have SI critic. They're all about preparation. Well, it's not really going to go that far, because you can all have the preparation in the world, but that you're still reactive. You still need to learn how to be proactive, right? But you can't be proactive if you're not aware of the possible consequences of what's going to happen, right? Whereas it's the other way around for the INFP and the INTP. They're not reactive enough. And they go all out for being prepared. But then their reaction time is so slow. It's like, hey, man, I'm prepared for a fire. Building explodes. That was fast. Do you think they'd have enough time to get all their gear together and get out safely? No. No, they wouldn't. So that's the negative look of what any parent to SE Trickster is. I'm prepared, man. I'm trained. I'm prepared. Building explodes, because they're not prepared for every eventuality. They're not prepared for every possible effect, right? And that's a problem. They're not going to be able to get anywhere safe. Where it's the other way around with the ISTP and the ISFP, they end up being underprepared. Super proactive, though. So they have that fast reaction time. Building explodes, they're good, but they don't have the gear to solve the problem still. They don't have the fire extinguisher. They're literally those people that say, "Oh, I'll smell smoke and I'll wake up." Those are the SE parents of the world, okay? And you're like, wait a minute, but this is SE parent we're talking about. They're supposed to have mechanical mastery, right? They would know that that's a problem, right? No. My ICP grandfather refused to wear a seatbelt. Think about that. I don't know why someone's calling me. Interesting. Getting lots of phone calls this evening. Whatever. So yeah, lack of preparedness. It's like, are you going to wear your seatbelt? Are you going to put the fire extinguisher? Are you going to check your fire alarm? Are you actually going to bother to do that? Oh no, don't worry about it, CS Joseph. I can smell the smoke. It's all good. I got this. Oh, so you can smell the smoke, right? It's so funny how this is the battleground of responsibility, because the trickster is like literally making the parent be irresponsible, or because the parent is irresponsible, the trickster leads, right? The trickster gets to fill that slot temporarily. Just a little sick right now. Just found out this morning that my mother has COVID right now, and my dad's getting COVID too, which is a dangerous situation because my 89-year-old grandmother will likely get COVID, and I don't think she'd survive that situation. So I'm kind of a little on edge with those considerations. So yeah, it's kind of like dealing with that in the back of my head right now. Anyway, so the negative aspects of the battleground of the responsibility is like, being lack of prepared or not proactive, right? So when you're not proactive, you don't have as good of a reaction time, okay? So what needs to happen? Well, INPs need to accept the fact that they're not really that reactive, and just because they have a lot of gear and a lot of, they think they can prepare for every eventuality, some things can happen really hard and quick. Sure, using SE, means they should practice and do drills and whatnot, but still they're not going to be able to prepare for every single situation. It's only when they've already experienced those situations ahead of time that they can draw upon their SI child to be able to help them get out of those situations, but SI child doesn't always actually have that experience. It's kind of like my ESTP friend's INFP wife sitting on the side of the beach and a huge wave comes and hits her in the face and she didn't even notice it coming. Right? It's because of SE Trickster, right? It's a thing. It's a problem, So what are the positive aspects of this? Well, basically role reversal in this point. The extroverted sensing trickster is like, I have no idea what people around me are doing or what the immediate effects are. Go find an additional extroverted sensor and have them show you what would happen, or have them teach you additional skills over time. So I knew this INFP. He was right. He had an ESTP father, and that ESTP father made sure that his son knew every inch of his shop. every tool, every use for each of the tools, and he made his son practice on all of those tools so that his introverted sensing child would have all of that experience to be able to use those tools in any and every situation just in case, because he knew his son was an absolute ditz when it came to anything mechanical. He just knew. He's like, you're just going to do this, and you're going to be good at it, and I'm going to make you good at it. Well, sometimes you don't have that ESTP father when you're an INP and you're faced doing that, so you have to learn how to make yourself do it. Use your self-discipline. And recognize that this is an area of improvement for yourself. I have an INTP friend of mine, and he goes camping every weekend specifically to challenge his trickster constantly. And what this does is it helps him increase his responsibility on the part of his parent function. That's what it does, because he's able to utilize this self-awareness. He's able to use other functions that are in axis and in orbit with his parent function to help develop his parent function. He can also do the reverse to do the same thing with the trickster function to get it moving forward, right? But both these functions, because if you notice, they're both extroverted functions. As much as the last month's episode, those also were extroverted functions. These are kind of more the subjective functions. They're not as objective as the introverted functions, right? So there's a lot of subjectivity here. And being able to manage that subjectivity, the subjectivity of long-term consequences versus short-term reactions, right? So those SI users, the INPs, really have to commit themselves to gaining enough experience to be able to manage all of the possible reactions. And if they don't have experience, well, then they're not really going to be able to be prepared, and necessarily they're not exactly going to be in a safe situation, potentially, right? So as much as strategic as they can be, their reaction time is just really low. And that's not always going to be there. So them developing mechanical mastery over time will actually cause them to be less foolish. This is why INPs oftentimes are taught by SPs, for example, to be able to gain those skills. Consequently, the reverse is also true. ISPs need to understand that, guess what? Consequences to things happen. And that it is possible to get their life in a foobar situation where it's, quote, fucked up beyond all repair. To the point where they realize that they can create such negative consequences with their SE actions, such negative consequences, that all of a sudden they think that they can unobligate themselves. They think they can get themselves out of any situation, but they really actually can't. They finally landed themselves in jail. They finally landed themselves in a sticky situation where it's too sticky, and they can't get out. And, it's like, don't touch your hand on the burning stove. What do? They touch their hand on the burning stove, but they keep it there, and then it just melts. You see what I'm saying? It's, yeah, exactly, Jacob. INPs need to learn how to do without. Exactly. It's the same kind of thing. INPs are people of over-preparedness. ISPs are people of under-preparedness, but they are very proactive. But then, the other side, it's a thing, right? So you have to keep that balance in there. It's really, really important. An SE hero or SE parent, it's funny because they claim to be so responsible with mechanical awareness, but do they actually make something built to last? If they can really truly understand the consequences, so what they need to do is go to other people, find out other people's experiences, find out what the long-term effects of buying a certain tractor, for example, or buying a certain vehicle, for example, and using that equipment, what it would be. Or imagine, like, for example, an ISP is building something, right? And they want to make it built to last. That's what SE Parent is all about. It's all about built to last, right? The thing is, though, is that they don't necessarily know for a fact that what they're building is going to be built to last. They don't know. What they need to do is go to other people and delve into other people's experiences and find out people who have had similar things that they're trying to build and figure out what the long-term consequences those people experienced, and then hedge against those long-term consequences with what they're building, with their SE, with what they're making, with their SE. And that way, they're not making crap. That way, their stuff actually truly is built to last. Yeah, sure, what they're building will work in the immediate. It's kind of like sticking a piece of gum on a hole that's leaking fuel, right? That's a very short-term solution. And ISPs, with their any tricksters, are all about short-term solutions. but they need to be able to understand that long-term solutions are really, really important. They have to prioritize that. And it's so funny when you watch an ISP make something or build something and they assume it's going to last a long time and it literally breaks an hour later. It's hilarious. It's because they are not aware of the long-term consequences. They are only aware of the immediate reactions. Okay? So this is the battleground of responsibility. If these parent functions are going to be responsible between these four types, if these types are going to be really responsible, they have to be willing to change. Okay? The introverted sensors, the INPs, they have to be willing to practice their mechanics. Whereas the ISPs have to be willing to go find out what the consequences are before they build something, before they make something, before they do something. They have to be willing to put in a little bit extra and realize that they have that blind spot there that needs to be filled. Because either way, it's not good enough. It's both going to blow up in everyone's face. And that's the battleground of responsibility. And hopefully you folks can see why it's about responsibility, especially with those two functions, because there can be some really bad ramifications there. Well, no, it's not. Well, yeah, it is developing TE. That's where the development is. Remember, cognitive reflection is about expression of behavior. It is not about development of behavior. But in order to get around the bad behavior, the negative behavior that could be expressed by each of the battlegrounds, you use the functions that are within the battlegrounds, you use their axes and you use their orbits to develop those functions further, which can also mean you're developing other functions secondarily in tandem, so that you are not having these negative behavioral expressions within this particular battleground of the reflection. I hope that makes a little bit more sense for you, Cynthia. And thank you for making that statement. On to the battleground of innocence. Okay, so the battleground of innocence, you have extroverted sensing child and you have extroverted intuition child versus extroverted sensing critic and extroverted intuition critic. Very interesting. Now, battleground of innocence, the reason why it's called innocence is because, you have the senile elder or the old fogey who's trying to be like, I really wish I could be a kid again. All these youngins, they have their youth, they don't know what they have, etc. So they like to be a little kid with the little kid. They like to be the little kid with their grandchild, because that grandchild reminds them of what it's like to be young again. Oh, to be young again, that whole concept, right? This is the battleground of innocence, right? The thing is, though, is that they're not innocent. The critic is not innocent. The thing is, and it becomes senile. It becomes really, really bitter. It becomes very bitter towards their own child function or towards the child function of other people, because they won't even allow it. And they don't even know that they themselves are becoming more innocent, because as an elderly person gets more elderly, they become more and more innocent. And that's how we work in human culture, is that we are supposed to take care of our children and take care of our elders. Really important, because, if we don't do this, they can't help themselves, ultimately over time. So this is why it's called the battleground of innocence, right? So, yes, Jay, ISPs overly rely on luck instead of getting that guaranteed outcome of built to last, because they actually found out what the consequences of their actions are actually going to be, because they didn't bother. It's literally taking a shortcut. That's a problem with NI child in that particular situation, because the SE parent is irresponsible and not keeping that NI child in check, because the trickster is actually leading that child at that moment. The NI trickster is leading the NI child, and the NI child is like, oh, it just must be luck because it worked this one time and it'll work for every other time, right? That's not going to work for the battleground of responsibility. Battleground of innocence, okay, going a little bit further than that, all right, back to it, extroverted sensing child, all about giving other people a really good experience. This is the ENJ approach. And then they have extroverted intuition critic. And extroverted intuition critic, when it's really senile, when it's not allowing itself to appreciate and it's becoming very bitter as a critic attitude. It's being a very bitter, senile old man or woman, etc. and it's willing to punish the youth because the youth have it good and the youth have it entitled, etc., and they're expecting the youth to take care of them, etc., they end up losing their own innocence, even though as they're getting in age, they're getting more innocent, right? And because of this causes the inner child to actually get into a lot of trouble, right? So, for example, an SE child, this could cause an SE child to take and take and take and take from other people because their NE critic is like, oh, well, this person's not going to want me anymore anyway, because I'm getting older and they're not going to want me anymore, which means my SE child is not going to be able to get attention from them anymore, and I really need their attention, so I'm going to take as much as I can get. And they end up like behaving like a pirate in that regard. This is why you have the greed vice. You have the greed vice coming out of the ENTJ, or you have the cruelty vice coming out of the ENFJ, and it's because the ENFJ is like, I'm carrying so much for other people right now. I need to get what I can get in return for that, and they end up covert contracting in that situation, or they end up taking away other people's voices and using that as an excuse to not listen to other people or actually care about other people's opinions whatsoever. And that can be a serious issue. It just adds additional fuel to the fire, right? When they need to get to the point and realize that not everyone's out to get them. People do actually stick around because they have to be willing to accept that people actually love them for being them, not because of what they can get away from them or get out of them, basically, what they can get away with. Because ENTJs all have that issue about them. That's where that greed vice and the cruelty is like, well, you're not going to want me to teach you anymore. And keeping your attention is going to be really hard. So to make sure that you actually learn your lesson, to make sure that I did the good thing, to make sure that I did something of value, I'm going to be as cruel to you as possible so you never forget this situation and you always learn the lesson, and you'll be learning this lesson, and this lesson will be learned and remain learned for the next 2 decades. You see what I'm saying? That's like literally what happens, okay? That's extrovert intuition. Critic being like super senile mode. Well, let's look at SE critic. SE critic being super senile mode with extrovert intuition, child. It's like, oh, I'm so desirable with any child, but like, we got these young whippersnappers that have come into the company, and I've been here for 15 years, and he's already been here for 2 years, and all of a sudden, he's going to be my boss? What the hell? No, I'm going to sabotage that. I'm going to work my way to destroy that because I'm entitled, because I've been here a lot longer than that person has, and I put in a lot more effort. I put in way more effort. I'm more desirable because I put in way more effort, and I got to protect my effort that I've put in, that I've responsibly put in, to this company, etc. And this is where, age and treachery versus youth and skill actually comes from. Age and treachery literally is extrovert sensing critic. That's really what it is. That whole concept comes from there. And they become very treacherous, these SE critics. Very treacherous. Willing to sell out anybody, any of the young people around there, because it's like, well, they didn't work as hard as I did, so and because I either cared the most or because I achieved the most, within this amount of time, I deserve this. So, and because of my performance, because I'm the one who has the most experience with my critical, senile, performance-driven SE critic, I'm the one who should be desirable, and that critic ends up causing that child to get into trouble, to the point where that child basically is saying different narratives to different people, manipulating different futures, to the point where the child is putting itself in a position to be irreplaceable, so that the only choice other people have to want or to desire is to come to the ESJ in this moment. This is why, for example, ESFJs, especially ESFJ men, although it's getting a lot worse with the ESFJ women, don't, and that's a fact. But ESFJ men have this thing where a lot of them in corporate America use their position, their SE critic position, basically with all their performance and everything they've done with their SI parent, where they literally give the women that work under them no choice but to sleep with them in exchange for a promotion at the company. That's a thing. And it's because of SE Critic being in its super senile mode within the battleground of innocence. It's like it's choosing to not accept that it's innocent. Because imagine what would happen if these ESJs within these companies were actually engaging in the innocence of them being, old and crunchy and, being at the company for 25 years, etc. And just recognizing that, people be easier on them. People go easy on them because they've been around for so long. Why can't they be happy that they get that advantage instead of ruining someone else's life or ruining someone else's future because, that person didn't work as hard as I did, and why are they getting everything that should have been given to me, etc. It's horrible, So, and that's what causes it causes chaos for the ESTJ. It causes covert contracts for the ESFJ, and they end up becoming extremely abusive people. Just like with ENJs, they become extremely abusive people because they get paranoid, and they let their paranoia inhibit their child from giving good experiences to other people, right? That's where it comes from. And it's a problem. Or the ESJ ends up creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where people don't want them anymore because they're being in their critic's senility, their senile critic. I think Carl Jung calls it the senix because it's senile, right? In that particular moment, no one's going to stick around for them. No one's going to vouch for them. No one's going to give them an easy time. No one's going to give them an easy going. No one's going to give them the benefit of the doubt anymore because they're allowing themselves to compete with the youth. And the youth will, ultimately, that youth and skill will win. Age and treachery, it does trump youth and skill, but only for a time. Because eventually, people are not going to go easy on you anymore because you're trying to compete with the youngin', and you're not going to win. You're not going to win against the youngin', okay? So what happens to the battleground of innocence for these two functions? This is a problem for these types. They just fall apart. They absolutely fall apart. So you got to watch out for that, folks. You absolutely have to watch out for that, okay? Think about the positive ways of the battleground of innocence for these two functions and these four types. What would happen? What would happen if the ENJs decided to go out of their way to be as desirable as possible, where they weren't so senile anymore and they decided to be wise, right? And they decided to engage in their innocence a little bit and be like, hey, this is something everybody wants to do, so let's include you. For example, like I just had an ENJ finally offer me a contract, but I had to go to him to do it. He could have started that whole process. He could have done it on his own with his NE. NE, like for example, you do input, process, output, feedback. Extroverted intuition is the first function in that, for the perception functions in terms of the data flow, like we talk about here in cognitive mechanics in the first or second or third episode of this entire season. And it is the input. And he could have input and led with a contract, because that's true leadership, at the very beginning. But instead, he didn't do me that solid. So then he became paranoid because he became paranoid because he knew he was taking advantage of me. That's it. He knew he was taking advantage of me. So he was creating his own paranoia, which led to him giving a bad experience to me and making me desire to or consider not being loyal to him anymore, not sticking me around, which then would cause me to leave, and then he would blame me for leaving, even though it was his fault, because he created his own paranoia because he didn't offer me a contract to begin with, like he did everybody else on the team. You see what I'm saying, folks? Pretty fucked up. Welcome to that ENTJ greed vice, right? And it's because of that, because they create their own paranoia. And these are the people, ENJs, these are the people that tell me to do things right the first time? Really? Really? Come on, any critics, stop being hypocrites, right? Come on. That's bullshit. So, But if they lead properly, if they initiate proper process, like the ENFJ, if the ENFJ was going to like initiate a proper teaching situation, they wouldn't have to be so cruel. If they did it right the first time, they wouldn't have to be so cruel. And those people will stick around and want to learn more from the ENFJ and highly regard that ENFJ. But no, the ENFJ has to shove it down their throat to make sure that they drive the point home. Right? That's bullshit. That's bullshit. Or what could be the positive way of doing, again, SE critic, getting closer to its innocence, being wise. It's wiser for them not necessarily to rest on their laurels, but allow people to go easy on them because those people respect them. Those other people respect them, like in the company, for example, that they've been there for decades, okay? They are respected, and they're treated well because they have put in that hard time in there. They shouldn't feel threatened by the young people. The young people look up to them, and they have to lead by example. They have to perform by example. They have to perform as a leader. Isn't it interesting how EJs are leaders? This is why. It's because these functions are within the battleground of innocence. That's why they're leaders. That's where it comes from. Okay? And besides, those people stick around. They'll foster relationships with those people, these young people, right? These young people that will be there to support them. What if they wanted to quit that company and become a CEO on their own? What if that ESJ wanted to, have their own business? Well, then they could still take the youth and skill along with them. You see what I'm saying, folks? It still benefits them. They become desirable. All of a sudden, the old ESJ who's worked at the company for 20 years gets invited by the young people to do things and hang out. And is actually wanted by the young people. Whereas the ESJ is trying to be wanted so much by the top dogs, the ESJ should also work to be wanted by the young people. And they should do that without being that super stifling, crotchety old man in the process. Or as the Mexicanos say, hombre verdes. You know what I'm saying? It's not approach. That's not ideal. And then the battleground of inhibition, where a person's inhibitions exist, where the nemesis and the inferior end up doing stuff together, but they're real close. They're really close together, so they just kind of can't help it. You know what I'm saying? So you have expert intuition nemesis versus SE nemesis, right? And then you have expert in sensing inferior versus expert intuition inferior. And this is where we get INJs and ISJs. Ooh. INJs and ISJs. The last four types that we're going to be discussing for this battleground. Oh my gosh. Good times. SE nemesis or SE inferior with its performance anxiety, and then any nemesis paranoia in the possibility, and so many self-fulfilling prophecies. Or the opposite when it comes to the ISJ. The ISJs, they're afraid of what could happen. And because of that, they can end up putting their heads in the sand. And it's like, it's kind of funny. My friend Robert, he's always telling me, I don't think we should be connecting those dots. And I'm like, well, why not? Why not connect dots? Why not? I mean, sometimes I could see how certain things can be an isolated situation, but when you have 6 or 7 dots, I mean, is there a pattern there? When does it become a pattern? Where's the line, any inferior? Tell me, where's the line, please? Tell any hero where the line is. That being said, he's not wrong, because there are certain situations where you shouldn't connect the dots. Because there have been times in my life where I've made judgments about people that are completely inaccurate. Because there was additional dots of a different kind that were unrelated to those dots, but they were kind of behind the scenes. Well, guess what? An ISFJ is behind the scenes. You see what I'm saying? And they're aware of that behind the scene angle always being present. It can be very good, but it can also be very bad. It can lead to ignorance, but it can also lead to wisdom at the same time if it's handled properly, right? It's really knowing when to connect the dots versus when not to connect the dots, right? But then that's just, a performance increase, because extroverted sensing nemesis worries about the experience that they're giving other people. This is why ISFJs are such amazing interior decorators. Everything is clean, dusted, laundry is done, no food on the floor, mopped properly, swept. They're aesthetic. They take it very seriously. They can even be artistic with their extroverted sensing nemesis as a result. ISTJs and ISFJs have this basically on lockdown, and it's pretty fantastic. The problem is that because they worry so much about giving other people a bad experience, they end up giving people a bad experience potentially. And that could cause people to not want them anymore because, again, self-fulfilling prophecy. It's the same thing with the INJs. They overperform. They overcompensate with their performance, which causes them to compete with other people. And then it's because they're worried that no one's going to want them. Oh man, I'm worried those people over there at this theater are not going to want me to be here anymore, so I'm going to overperform and compete with everybody else so that I could prove my worth, or I could show them that I'm doing a good job, right? This INTJ and this INFJ, but they end up getting fired anyway, not because no one wants them around, because they're constantly competing with all of the other actors and actresses and the staff at the theater. You see what I'm saying? It just blows up in their face, right? They let their inhibitions go down because they're so worried that something will happen, so they end up overcompensating with their inferior function. So they end up overcompensating. It's like, I need to aspire with my inferior function more so that I can get over my worry with my nemesis. When the reality of the situation is, that's just going to cause the outcome they're trying to avoid with their nemesis to come true. It's self-fulfilling prophecy between these two functions. Because it's action-reaction, or long-term consequence. It's a problem. It's a serious, serious problem. Extrovert intuition inferior, for example, it's like, or I'm worried that I'm not going to perform really well, so I'm going to go out of my way to make myself as desirable as possible. And then because they're focused on being as desirable as possible, they don't perform. And they end up, not being part of the theater troupe anymore, right? Or another way, they focus so much on trying to develop and practice their talent, they end up practicing it in the wrong places. That's another one. They end up, they put all their eggs in the wrong basket, basically. Because it's like, I should do this because this is going to make me more wanted in this particular scenario. Okay. Is that really what's going to happen? Are you really going to be desirable? You don't want to fall in that, anti-hero problem of, a lot of effort but going nowhere when you're on the rocking horse. You have to be getting a really good outcome from it. ISTJs have this thing where they need to make themselves look like they're performing. But is there any real substance there? Is there any actual substance? Because they're worried that they're not going to perform. And, I've even had to deal with this with my ISFJ mother-in-law, because she came over, we did the baby shower for the baby and my wife, and it was this big thing. But she was a momzilla the whole time. She disrespected me. She treated me like crap. And because she was so worried that the performance, because she from her point of view, it was her show, her baby shower, okay? And she walked all over me. She walked all over my wife. She treated us like crap. She even was literally yelling at me while I was putting together the camera equipment because, COVID-19 and, no one wanted to come to the baby shower physically, so it was an e-baby shower, that kind of a thing. And a lot of families showed up, etc. But she was yelling at me about the cameras and the setup and the lighting and all of that because, from her standpoint, she's an SI hero, so she wants to be really prepared. So up to her, she'd be prepared an hour or two in advance. I started building everything for her 15 minutes in advance with my INTJ shadow using I wasn't exactly procrastinating. I was just really, really busy, but I knew I could have everything up in just 15 minutes, etc. And that's the thing. Hey, I'm on a live stream. I'll call you back.
Hey, if you want, I was gonna head out of the shop. If, send me an email and I'll get back on the other tab.
All right, thanks, man. I had to take it. If he calls me, like, my cousin Mike is like the man I respect the most in like my whole life. So if he calls, like, I kind of gotta take it. And he called multiple times, so it could have been like an emergency. So yeah, but anyway, he's good. I just gotta help him out. Anyway, um, I gotta help him out because we lost a 300,000 Dogecoin wallet, which sucks. Yeah, 300,000 Dogecoins lost, and we're trying to recover it. So who knows if we'll be able to recover it? But that sucks. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing this evening. Woohoo! Something we used to own a mining operation for cryptocurrency, mining Litecoin and Dogecoin back in 2014, and apparently I was irresponsible and didn't keep the cryptocurrency wallets properly backed up and encrypted like an idiot. So it may be just an inaccessible wallet. So woohoo! Um, but anyway, you know, so inhibition is a thing here because so they either let go of their inhibition, which blows up in their face and it creates the self-fulfilling prophecy, or they over-inhibit themselves and they still get nowhere. It's always just one or the other, you know. So like an SE, so like for example, SE inferior will either overperform and compete, or it will underperform and like literally do nothing, right? You know, and like I was saying with my ISFJ mother-in-law, you know, she was letting me have it with the cameras. She was yelling at me. She was trying to put on a show because her ESFP shadow wanted her family to look good in front of the rest of her family, right? She was literally showing us off, showing off her family, showing off her pregnant daughter who was pregnant with her very first grandchild, you know, momzilla type of approach, that kind of a thing. You know, this is what she was doing. And, you know, because you know, she's afraid of being, you know, not wanted. She wants to be as desirable as possible. But from her standpoint, that's not going to work if I can't put on the show, because the more I put on the show, the more desirable I will be, right? So she was basically trying to earn that favor or brownie points for the rest of the family by making it look as good as possible. And she was worried with her SE nemesis that I wasn't doing it fast enough or I wasn't doing it right. And she was nitpicking me with her TI child constantly the entire time. It was absolutely difficult for me. I couldn't, I could barely handle it. I literally just left. I literally left the building. I left the building to get away from her because of that whole situation. It was the baby shower. It was not the appropriate time to, like, you know, lose my shit at my mother-in-law, literally as people were coming into the Zoom call for the baby shower. So I just decided to leave. That being said, you know, she's a really good person. She's a very caring person. But, you know, sometimes adults can still end up acting like children and being infantile. This is an example of them being infantile in this certain area, you know. Because it's like, well, I'm really worried that if I don't perform, then no one's going to want me anymore, basically. Or people are still not going to want me, etc., right? And she so desperately wants to be wanted by the family, so she let go of some of her inhibitions to try to, like, force me to hurry up or whatever. I had that camera gear and everything set up, and we were live, and everything was working perfectly at literally the exact moment in time that the baby shower started. And 1 second she was yelling at me, and the next she was like, "Oh, hi, everybody." And I'm like, oh, wow. That's Crusaders for you. All Crusaders can do that. Those method actors, right? So I mean, that's where it comes from. You know, another negative aspect for, you know, like INJs, you know, underperforming, because it's like they end up getting paranoid that people are going to leave them anyway. So like, well, why bother trying? Why bother doing 1,000 free throws if I'm not going to be making the team? Because I'm just going to assume that I'm making the team, right? You know, and as much as an ISFJ or an ISTJ can end up making assumptions about people not wanting them if they underperform. There's assumptions that go there, right? So it ends up leading to undercompensation or overcompensation, under inhibition or over inhibition, with the battleground of inhibition specifically because of SE&E. Well, let's look at some of the good things, right? Getting INJs to realize that, okay, yeah, maybe I shouldn't really be paranoid, and I'm just going to perform for performance's sake. I don't have to compete with anybody else. I just have to compete with myself. And if they compete with themselves and use themselves as their own litmus, basically, they'll compete well. Which, guess what? They end up getting, or they won't have to compete with anyone. They're just competing with themselves. They will improve. They have that continuous improvement, Kaizen point of view in their life. And then they don't have to worry about people backstabbing them or not wanting them anymore because they are desirable, because they are naturally performing the way that they should, because they are competing against themselves and not other people. They're not externalizing it. They are internalizing it. It's the same thing with ISFJs. They need to get to the point where they realize that their own personal performance really has nothing to do with how desirable they are. It really doesn't. Their desirability is extremely subjective. Are they actually putting an effort, or are they forcing other people to put in the effort? If they've put in a lot of effort and they know that they did a good job from like an outcome standpoint and how they're able to see what they've experienced in the past and perform, and put in the effort in the proper place and not put their faith in the wrong thing, people will automatically want them, so their inferior function is good. And and their performance will be well because they know that they gave their best effort in that moment. So what do they have to be worried about? They don't. And then they're not so afraid of being desirable anymore. They're not so worried about people not sticking around and giving them the benefit of the doubt anymore. Because the reality of the situation is that they know for a fact that the people around them remember. They know that the people around them remember all the things that they have done previously. And they know that those people, if they make a mistake, will give them the benefit of the doubt. And that's really what would make them feel wanted, because they know people would give them the benefit of the doubt. That's the thing about ISJs. They're so worried that people won't give them the benefit of the doubt that they assume that automatically means that they're not wanted anymore. That too is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, oh, if I don't have enough evidence that I'm going to be given the benefit of the doubt when I take this action, then that must mean that this person doesn't want me. And then they get really, really bitter. ISJs allow themselves to get super, super bitter, even though nothing happened. Nothing happened at all. They just get bitter randomly. And you're like, what the heck just happened? Just communicate, please. Well, I don't know, if you'd want me to communicate. I'm like, yes, of course I want you to communicate all the time. Please, God Almighty, do this. So an example is them to communicate. A good example of a positive thing is to realize that what they should be inhibiting is inhibiting their own worry, and instead communicate their concerns. By communicating their concerns, who wouldn't listen to them? Robert told me recently, bless his heart, from his point of view, he asked me, like, hey, I don't feel good about this particular thing that we're doing. Can we change it this way? And I'm like, yeah, sure, go for it. Like, immediately. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And I do that with him all the time. But like over time, it's so interesting to watch extrovert intuition inferior question, or in some cases, I'm not saying he does it, but in some cases assume that they're not going to be accepted, or they're not going to be wanted in certain situations, or they're not going to be regarded or respected when they share a thought or an opinion that may be counter to what people regularly, would be against in a particular situation. Within my life, sometimes I have this larger in life attitude, and sometimes people assume that I'm not going to listen, or they assume that I'm not going to want what they have to hear, these ISJs. But that's why I keep ISJs close to me, because I do want to hear what they have to hear, because they're going to provide me the camaraderie and the challenge to challenge me so that I grow and I'm a better person. I can't just keep, some stupid ass echo chamber all the time, keep my head in this freaking echo chamber all the time with everything that I'm doing. I can't do that. I can't have that echo chamber thing going on. And I don't want to have yes men in my life enabling me. ISJs aren't going to enable me. And that's why I like them around. And I want them around because of that. And they don't have to worry about their performance so much. They don't have to worry about me not wanting them. They don't have to assume that I don't want them, especially if they're worried about performing badly in a situation. We could just solve the problem and move on to the next thing. It has nothing to do with that. This is why I like ISJs a lot, and I need them in my life. My brother-in-law is an ISJ. I have the same kind of thing going on with him. He oftentimes assumes I don't want him. And he's calling me constantly. So what I do is I call him, if I haven't called him in a while, I'm like, hey, I haven't called you, sorry about that, I had this, and this, to make sure that he understands that I want him. I do that. Or all the ISJs in my life, I spend time with them. I sit down, I'm like, okay, what's up? I share things with them, and they share a lot with me, and I like to hear their stories, etc. And I learn. I put on my learning cap. You see what I'm saying? So these are the benefits that come from having a healthy battleground of inhibition. And it's important, folks, to make sure that all of your, reflector functions, these cognitive reflections, the second reflection of extroverted sensing and extroverted intuition, battleground of titans, responsibility, innocence, and inhibition, that these are healthy. But remember, these are healthy expressions of behavior. These are not, you can't use these to develop yourself. You have to develop yourself using axis and orbit, transitions, gateway functions, that kind of development. But to be able to, but you use these reflections to identify if you need development, okay? And then how you do it is you use those other tools. And then as you use those other tools, your expression of your behavior will come out in your reflections in a healthier manner. So you'll have healthy battlegrounds, healthy internal relationships between the titans, the responsibles, the innocents, and the inhibitions. These things are all important for you within your own personal growth. All right, that's it for season 18, episode 15, the second reflection. This is now Q&A time. Let's. I gotta get off, folks. This is a little bit longer, but there's just so much to cover with this subject matter. What did you guys think about this lecture? Was this a good lecture? Was that very helpful? Did you guys learn something, etc.? Pretty good. And do you guys have any questions or relating to this specific lecture? No other content, please. I would very much appreciate that, if possible. So let's see if anyone has anything here on the chat. Any questions? No. So, all right. Well, thank you, folks. That's great. I appreciate that. Okay. All right. Oh, we have a question. Go Speed Racer. Type it fast if you can. At what age is it best to develop someone's parent function? I think if you're a parent, I'd probably say right at the beginning of adolescence, essentially. Like towards the end of the tween years, basically. And then just keep doing it indefinitely. What do you mean by resting on your morals? I'm not talking about resting on your morals. I'm talking about resting on your laurels. 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 And Amartaj says, any critic can cause SE child to be the cause of irresponsibility for NI parent. No, it's more of it will create a mess for NI parent to have to clean up, basically. Because adolescents and adults both close off their ego. Yes, that is correct. Yes, that is absolutely correct. I just realized there was 3 T's in your name. I don't know why it took that long. It's all good, Yasmin. No problem there. Cool. And anyone else? Okay, doesn't look like we got any more questions going on. So I had to cut the Q&A time short, folks, but we went like at 30 minutes over what we should have. So that's kind of like, but there's just so much content to go over with these reflector functions. So excellent, but I missed the first hour. Good times. Good times, Jacob. Yeah, good times. I'm not a fan of push-ups, but I can get them done, etc. So, cool, folks. You all have a good night, and thank you for watching. And I hope to see you guys next month for the next episode of Cognitive Mechanics. You all have a good evening.